everyone. Welcome back to the People Contingency Podcast. I'm Holli, Beth, and today we're tackling what HR really can be when it's done right. Not just compliance, but a true driver of trust, culture, and results. My guest is Jennifer McClure, a keynote speaker, future of work strategist, and CEO of Unbridled Talent, as well as Chief Excitement Officer at DisruptHR. Jennifer's got the gift for helping leaders unlock potential, build workplaces people actually want to be a part of, and navigate all the change hitting us in the world of work. In our conversation, we dig into how to turn HR into a strategic powerhouse, why curiosity and data are game changers, and how authenticity can shape both leadership and branding. If you lead people, this one's going to give you plenty to think about. Let's jump in. Now here's Jennifer. Jennifer, thank you so much for being on the People Contingency. I've been looking forward to this all week, so welcome.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
Absolutely. I wanted to start by talking about the function of HR and how it is in certain sections. My industry that I primarily worked in is applied behavior analysis, but I'm sure this applies outside of that as well. We can talk about how HR fits in more than just, a compliance function, but as part of something that builds the culture, that has the strategy on retention. Would really love to hear from you what you think about HR's role.
Sure. Well, HR, like many things, is going to be a lot of different things to a lot of different people, depending on both the culture that they're in, as you mentioned, as well as the leadership expectations. But I think what HR can be and what it should be when it's properly supported and properly set up in an organization is more about enabling the organization rather than keeping it in the guardrails. There's guardrails, but everybody should be keeping people in guardrails. There are rules that are not just set by HR. It's really about understanding what talent we need to achieve our goals and objectives, what skills that talent needs, what systems that talent needs, what leadership that the talent needs. So I look at HR more as an enablement factor in an organization, developing people, developing systems, developing processes, developing training, a lot of creating to ensure that we are able to hit our objectives. So when leadership values HR and sees the function and the people who work at HR in that way, I think that's when it works best. So I've long said that I think HR is the most important job in any company because it has the biggest opportunity to have influence and impact over every person in the company. So even if it's a 100-person organization and they see people every day and they know everyone's names, sure, they can impact them. But if it's a 100,000-person organization, the systems and the policies and the processes and the training and development that HR is doing impacts every person in the company. So it's a real opportunity to make a difference in such a critical role, in my opinion.
Absolutely. I like that. It is the heart of an organization, if you will, which makes me think of the flip side. What's the risk when you don't have the heart of the organization or have an HR department in it?
Yeah, I think you risk when you don't have someone kind of looking across the organization again and thinking about how this impacts everyone, or does this match with our values or our culture? Sure, I think, again, every leader in the company has a responsibility to do that. But if you're a functional team leader like finance or marketing or sales, you're really focused on just your team. If you're the CEO, you're probably focused on the investors and the shareholders and making sure that we're hitting the numbers for Wall Street, et cetera, if you're a public company, where HR really is truly responsible for looking across the whole organization and saying, how does this policy that we're putting in place in sales impact other departments, impact everyone in the organization? Is it consistent with how we're doing things in marketing, et cetera? So it's the function that really does look across the whole organization and should be looking across the whole organization. So often HR will get tagged with that they're responsible for culture, which, then everybody will come out of the woodwork to argue that it's not HR's job to be responsible for culture. And I tend to agree with that. Culture is everyone's responsibility, and it's certainly impacted by leaders and how they walk the talk or don't. But I think HR, again, plays the role of kind of ensuring that we are living up to our values, that we are looking again across the organization. we're humans. And so as leaders, we'll make decisions for our team and in our best interest that maybe we haven't even thought about how that impacts the whole organization. And I think HR really is responsible for making sure that we're looking again how we do things. Is it reflective of our culture? Is it reflective of our values? Are we impacting just this small group, or does it typically impact everyone in the organization, the decisions that we make and how we do things? They have a really important role in culture. I think I've often called it, I asked a CEO once, he told me something about being responsible for culture. And I said, I'm the champion of culture. I'm the one that's, making sure that we're living up to our values, that I'm repeating back to people, does this match with when we say we do this, does this match that, et cetera. So I'm not responsible for it. You and I both are responsible for it, but it's more about that I'll be your champion for the culture.
You're the head coach. There's other people that are looking at defense and looking at offense and coaching some of the specific parts of the team. But you're right, as HR, you see everything, so you have a little bit more information to help guide. I want to piggyback off of something that you just mentioned, which is if you're in sales or you're in a specific department that's really focused on productivity and you're looking at metrics, oftentimes I find that people data is not necessarily collected. From your vantage point, talk about the importance of having data in people and what that data could look like.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of data that we can and should collect in terms of understanding the big picture, about retention numbers, about engagement numbers, of time to productivity, those types of things. Are our training systems working? Are people actually going to training and then being able to implement what they do? So there's lots of ways that we can measure impact in HR. What I think we need to be mindful of is making sure that we're not collecting data just to be collecting data, or that we don't just put up charts and graphs every month because we always have. We should be asking the question about what we're doing with any data that we're collecting. What is the purpose of it? What's the goal of collecting the data? So in other words, once we get enough data, are we going to make a decision to do this or that? Or is it something that we're constantly monitoring to make sure that we're not going out of alignment or something didn't happen that needs to be addressed? So it really depends on what data to collect. But, certainly we're going to look at things, like you said, retention. We're going to look at productivity. We're going to look at, training effectiveness, et cetera. But it really matters. I think a lot of times we collect data to identify what a problem is. Someone says, I don't feel like I have the right people on my team. Okay, well, what data do we need to collect to understand what the situation is today, what you would want it to look like, and then what steps we would need to take to get there? We feel like engagement is low. Our employees look sad. Well, again, sad, happy is not a measurement of engagement necessarily, but whatever it is that we feel like engagement is low. Okay, we can put out an opinion survey, but what do we really need to collect to see if people are truly engaged in their work? Are they going above and beyond in some way, and how can we measure that? Are they slacking off because they feel they don't have ownership of their tasks? How can we measure that? So it's often, how do we truly identify a problem and its source and really dive deep into what the problem is, instead of just some overarching data? Like turnover, for example, is something HR typically tracks. Turnover can be meaningless if it's just, okay, our organization had 7% turnover last month. But if you really dive down into the data, 50% of that turnover was in one department. Okay, that's where it starts to get interesting. So in this one department, what functions are typically turning over quicker, et cetera. I worked at a Japanese company once, and we used the philosophy of 5 whys, which I think there are other variations of that too, but you should be asking why 5 times. Okay, so turnover is high. Why? Turnover is high in this department because this is a distributed team. Well, why? It's because you just need to keep asking the questions so that you can get to what is potentially the root cause. So there's lots of ways to use data. Another is to identify an opportunity. So it's not just problems that we need to collect data around, but what are the opportunities that we need to look into? If we trained our employees in how to use AI prompts better, what could we potentially do in terms of improving productivity? Hopefully it's not, what could we potentially do in terms of eliminating jobs? What could we do in terms of improving productivity, or what could these people be doing instead of some of the data that, or the manual tasks that they're doing today that we could potentially replace with AI. So it's problems and opportunities, or where there's opportunities for data-rich environments. And so we should just always be curious and asking questions. If someone's performing really well, if a team is performing really well, let's collect data around what is it that's working really well. Does their manager do a good job of rewarding and recognizing them? Do they have more flexibility on their team than others? So it's about curiosity. I think that's the central tenet for understanding what data we need to collect. Let's be curious about what's working well. Let's be curious about what the opportunities are. Let's be curious about what's not working well. And let's be curious about the root cause of problems.
I mean, wow, what a rich answer. And it starts with something so small, which is the question of why, and then being intentional. So thank you. I really hope that it's rewound and played again and shared, because it's perfect. It's exactly what leaders need to hear. And so I appreciate you sharing that. I want to switch gears a little bit, because I can't ignore your ability to brand things magnificently. You are brilliant at that, and people can go to your LinkedIn and see for themselves. In terms of recruitment marketing, any advice that you have for companies that are trying to figure out what their brand is and don't know where to start, so they're copying other brands and what's working for them? What advice would you give a company?
Another good question. I'm going to be very simplistic here, and it's going to sound too simplistic maybe for some larger organizations, but I think it works. One of the things I talk about, I talk about the future of work and strategic leadership and innovative people strategies are the things I'm passionate about. But I also, for the last 15 years or so, have done a session and a workshop on personal branding, because that often seems to be something that especially emerging leaders, women leaders, or even senior leaders can do a better job of. And one of the exercises that I suggest people do to understand their personal brand, first they do, their own homework, and what do I think I'm good at, and what are the skills that I have, and what do I like to do best, and what do I not like to do? So companies can do that as well. But a simple exercise is to go out and ask people, and you could do it through anonymous surveys if you want to get fancy, or you can send an email to people on your team, or you can walk up and ask people, what are 3 words that you would use to describe me? And it needs to be words, not phrases, not sentences. And there's a reason why we want words. So I'm going to ask people, again, whether in written form or in person, what are 3 words that you would use to describe me? And I'm going to ask a bunch of people, people that know me really well, work with me every day. I'm going to ask people maybe who just have a passing, maybe they just see my posts on LinkedIn, or maybe they just work in another department, but they're aware of me. So try to get a really good, broad cross section of people who you're going to be able to ask that question to. So again, from a company standpoint, you could ask all employees in an anonymous survey of some sort. What are 3 words that you would describe what it's like to work here? Would be the way you'd want to ask that question. And what you'll get back is a bunch of words. And then you take those words, and there are tons of free tools out there online, word art tools. You just upload those words, typically in a Word document, or you copy and paste them. And what it will do is spit back a word graphic where the words used more often are larger than other words. So for example, I did this in my personal brand way back a long time ago when I actually saw someone else do it. And so I actually asked this question on Facebook back in the day when I was using, like a lot of people, Facebook was kind of like a daily diary. I was just posting my life, probably more outside of work than inside of work, but I travel a lot for work and I enjoy that. And so I shared a lot of stuff. And one of the things that I would do is post pictures from my travels. I try to be funny and humorous and write about, feedback that I get as a speaker, et cetera. And so when I asked this question in my Facebook network, and this was again many years ago, back when Facebook was cool, it's not as cool as it was. And I got back all these words, and I uploaded them in the word graphic, not really knowing what to expect. And when it came back, the largest word on my word graphic was cupcakes. And
Interesting.
I was hoping that it would be more like speaker or human resources. And another large word was short skirt, which, that was hyphenated for the people who really were. And I was like, wow. But I knew immediately why I was getting back. And horses was another one. Again, this is Facebook. Diet Coke, which there are things that are synonymous with my personal brand. Diet Coke, horses, Keanu Reeves, and K-pop. If you know me for that, that's cool too. But getting that back in that word graphic was really helpful for a number of reasons, because it showed me 2 things. Number one, that people know you by what you talk about and what you share. There are people out there that are totally faking expertise because they share a lot of great content that maybe they copy from other people. That's unfortunate. But more people are known for certain expertise because it's what they talk about always. It's what they share about always, et cetera. So that was one thing that I got from that. Number two was I needed to stop because my thing was I would travel around the world, and everywhere I went, I tried to eat a cupcake, and I would take pictures of the cupcakes and, give them ratings. And I always talk about horses and Diet Cokes. The short skirt thing came from a feedback form that I got back at a big conference I spoke at, where I got 16 pages of single space feedback. And there was one comment that said the speaker wore a skirt that was too short. No speaker should wear a skirt above their knee. Well, number one, I went upstairs immediately and put the dress back on. It was below the knee. And so I found that funny. And so again, I shared it on Facebook as a kind of a funny comment. And then for months, maybe even years, I would be shopping in a store and I'd see a mannequin with a short skirt and I'd take a picture of it and I'd say, next SHRM speaker outfit, And so that turned into people saying, oh, you're speaking at this conference next month. What are you wearing? Because they were trying to be in on the joke too. So of course, when I asked people, what do you think of when you think of me? A bunch of people said short skirt, not because I wore one, but because of that comment. So that was what I learned. So how can a company do this? Again, you could ask your employees, what is 3 words you would use to describe what it's like to work here? And I had a company that I actually used to work for here in Cincinnati, a recruiting firm. So it's a smaller firm, but they did the exercise with their employees after I had left. And the words that were largest on their word graphic were things like family, trust, respect, culture, character, chemistry, which were their 3 kind of, promises to their clients: culture, character, chemistry. It was exactly what my experience was like to work there. So long answer to your question, but I think that's how a company maybe could get to the heart of what is it truly like, the experience of people working here. And you might be surprised, like I was with cupcakes. You might find that they like things that you never thought about, or they bring up, if again, the question is neutral. What are 3 ways you would describe what it's like to work here? So they might say negative things. And so if you get back, a large word on your word graphic that says frustrating or something like that, then, you have some work to do. Like I had to stop talking about cupcakes and short skirts if I wanted people to not associate with me with those. If you get back words like frustrating or demanding or exhausting, then you've got a lot more work to do than just shift the way you talk about things. But I think it's a good exercise to really get at, like my recruiting firm did here in Cincinnati. Every value that they had was represented on their word graphics. What that says is the company truly is living their values, and that the experience that employees are getting are exactly what they promised to them. So that could be your experience as well.
Well, I feel like I got to know you a heck of a lot more. And I
Cupcakes
love
versus
it. I'm here for it. I met Keanu Reeves once. Actually, I shouldn't say I met him. I stalked him. I worked at the Four Seasons, and he was having lunch with Sandra Bullock, and I was 19. I did the circle and then realized that was inappropriate and walked away. But man, is he tall. A great guy to love. So I like that. It serves somewhat as a mirror. I'm wondering, when a company is getting that back and let's say there are a lot of negatives, what's the risk in them ignoring it and having a facade online? What do you think that does when a company does that?
Well, it's huge risk. I mean, obviously, these are probably things, if they get back negative words on their word graphic or feedback, they probably already knew those things and were just ignoring it. So the risk to now go out and say something different than that is to have, in an age where everyone has a voice online, to have your employees anonymously or maybe even not anonymously disagree with that, your Glassdoor ratings. But still, the word's going to get out if you are saying value. And I've seen this before from clients who called me in to work on maybe something else, but then I'm talking to people and I look at the values on the plaque in the lobby and they say things like, we value work-life balance, we value integrity, we value this. And when I talk to people, they're like, man, I'm working 7 days a week. This is the worst job I've ever had. The leadership is awful. That word gets out. And when I looked again at their Glassdoor reviews and other things, they're telling people that. When I mentioned it to the CEO, he said, oh, those are just the disgruntled employees. I'm like, if you've got, 300 Glassdoor reviews and 70% of them say this, you need to look into that. Again, that's where curiosity needs to come into play. Okay, we clearly have a problem. I, as a CEO, don't feel it because I have the best job in the world. I get treated with all kinds of respect, but there must be people out there that don't feel that way. So how can we really dig into the heart of this problem? What's causing this? What do we need to look at? How are we going astray from our values? There's so many questions you could ask from just looking at your reviews, or again, what people are saying about your company, your customer experience. If your employees aren't happy, your customers are going to be impacted by that. So what are your reviews saying? Are they saying that, customer service was rude and disrespectful, or they never heard back from anyone? There's a lot of good information in those types of customer reviews about not just your customer experience, but how your employees have been trained, or the values that they're upholding or living up to, how they're being managed or led. It really comes back to, again, that curiosity.
Yeah, and you have to want to look in the mirror, right? And often as consultants, you know this, when you go into a company, you become a mirror of what they need to potentially look at. What advice do you have for consultants who are holding up a mirror and the company is looking away and doesn't want to see it? How do you coach them through that? Do you leave? What advice do you give consultants?
It's that phrase, speak truth to power. I mean, you have to do that as a consultant, I think, to be effective. To come in and continue to ignore the problems, I guess it in some way it associates you with poor quality work. But, there are a lot of people out there who are very successful doing poor quality work. I think from an integrity standpoint, though, it's on you. Even if, like I said, I was in the example that I mentioned, I was called in to evaluate the effectiveness of their HR team. But the first thing I did before I met with the CEO was look up how they were viewed online. I also was in my city, so I had ear to the ground word of what their word on the street was about working there. So when I met with him, I said, I'm happy to talk to your executives, talk to your leadership team, talk to some random samples of employees about HR and its effectiveness, but you've got a problem with retention, turnover, a bad reputation out in the community. And he was like, well, how do you know that? And I'm like, well, I see all this online. I hear this in the community. He's like, again, those are just the disgruntled employees. I'm like, when it's a consistent theme, you have a problem. Even if it is just the disgruntled employees, they're disgruntled for a reason. At the end of the day, we had to have some discussions. Now, this was a privately held company. He can choose to do what he wants because he owns the company. He can continue with the bad reputation, which is what he chose to do, But I leave there knowing that I at least wasn't silent about it. I made some suggestions for how they could improve things. The fact that those were ignored, I can't do much beyond that. But I think any consultant coming in to work with an organization, your work product should be a story of truth. Even, if you're called in to work on something else, if you notice things, brings those up, it's not your responsibility to solve those, especially if it's not what you've been engaged to do, but it's more than likely impacting whatever you've been called in to work on with the company, and probably will impact its success in the short term and the long term.
Absolutely, absolutely. And do you have a situation that was the opposite when you came in? And what happens when a CEO or an owner is on board? How has that impacted your ability to make change?
I wasn't a consultant in this case, but it was my last job working in the corporate world in HR. And I joined a new executive team that had been brought on board to turn around a 100-plus-year-old company that was about to go bankrupt. Very iconic brand in our community. So some local rich people had bought it to keep it from going under. And they brought in a new executive team to try to turn it around and sell it to someone who would steward the brand into the future. And so the CEO that was hired was a young Harvard MBA McKinsey consultant who'd never been a CEO before, but he was super passionate about not only wanting to be successful in turning the company around financially, but he truly cared about the people. And he came in before he hired me and several of the other people on the team, and really just, again, walked the halls and walked the floors and talked to people and generated enough trust from them. Not, you didn't have to have trust. They were so unhappy they'd tell anybody, but people told him honestly, I hate my life. This awful to work here. The leadership is, they lie, they cheat, they steal. They told him all these things, most of which were very accurate. And again, you have to look at the preponderance of the voices. If you walk the floor for 2 hours and for 2 hours, all you hear is how awful people feel about their workplace, you can't ignore that. And so when he hired me, he said, we're here to turn this business around financially, but we can't do that unless we turn it around culturally. And again, I need you to lead that. And that's when I said, I will lead it with you and I will champion it. But we as a leadership team really have to lead when it comes to culture. And it was a real heavy lift. It involved, again, going out, listening to people, not telling them that they were wrong, validating their lived experience. One of the things he said was, don't argue with people's feelings, because their feelings are valid, regardless of whether or not it's true. The fact that they feel this way is what we need to deal with. So we had to turn the corner, or that battleship, the metaphor for turning it really slowly was small little acts of building trust, listening to people, acknowledging. And one of the things he would say was, we started having quarterly all employee meetings, which had never been done before, where we as a leadership team would stand up and communicate not just the financial status, but what was happening in terms of change, what we were doing in HR, in terms of policies and procedures, and changing things to have a more respectful environment. And at every all employee meeting, he would stand up and he would end it with, and I don't remember them all, but one of the slides that he would show was what, the values that he expected his team, the leadership team, to be living up to. And one of those was tell the truth. And in the beginning, every time he would show that slide that said tell the truth, there would be like laughter and murmurs and whatever. And he would say, I hear you. I realize that may not have always been the case, but today what I'm telling you is that's my expectation. And if there's an example of where you don't feel like someone is telling you the truth, I personally want to know about it. That's how you can do that. You have to do the hard work. Now, in some ways, he was a little overzealous, and we had to have a lot of conversations because his tendency was to try to fix things. So what people would direct out hotline straight to the CEO, my manager's mistreating me. Now he would go to the manufacturing floor and, this is terrible. Manager, fix this, 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 and this. And so I had to have a lot of conversations with him, like, okay, you're telling me you want to hear this. That's great. But what you need to say back to them is, thanks for letting me know. I'm going to get with your manager and we're going to let him solve it, or her solve it, to reinforce to him that he wasn't the point of contact for every problem or solution in the organization, that he really needed to support the leaders in the company. Again, that was a second phase of, first we listen, then he take action, and then it was him instilling confidence in everyone else by supporting them and backing them up and taking the necessary actions. And we did turn the company around financially. The goal was to do it in 5 years. We did it in 2.5, sold it way more than the owners had ever expected. And I feel like we made a real cultural change as well. We installed team-based work systems. We did get people to, some of them, they'd been there 40 years. It was going to take a lot for them to get to trust management or leadership, but many of them came a really long way. And I, in HR, was able to do some really heavy lifts to change some long-standing policies, because the organization had been heavily unionized for many years. It wasn't, by the time I got there, they had busted the unions in a very harsh way. And so there was a lot of resentment around that. But as I was able to do things like change vacation pay policies that had some of our employees making more when they went on vacation than they would make in months, because they were getting paid a vacation rate based on the overtime that they had worked in the previous year, which was a wild and ridiculous calculation. Somebody making like $15 an hour might go on vacation and make $165 an hour, something wild like that. I was able to change things like that, which was, in theory, quote, not in theory, in reality, taking money away, by gaining their trust in why we needed to do those things. Now, again, out of all the employees, were 10% of them very, very mad because they liked making a lot of money when they went on vacation? Sure. But I was able to get more of them to understand why we needed to do some of those things. And also, we didn't just take away, we did make changes that were positive in their direction as well. So that trust was built up over time, and we were able to do some really difficult things through that mutual trust and information sharing. I think couldn't have been done otherwise, or, could have been done. But as the reason why I was brought in is because the previous HR person, who had been there 28 years, the first thing he told the CEO when he said he wanted to make some changes was, you can't do that or they'll unionize. And he's like, you're out, because we've got to find a way to do that. Well, they didn't unionize while we were there, and they're still not unionized. Not that unions are always a bad thing, but we really wanted to work directly with the people and to be on the same team. And that's always how I've functioned as an HR leader. one of the things that when I did my walking around, when I joined that company, and I actually did some small group meetings, and I had like flip chart back in the day, and I asked them, I think, 3 questions. And one of the questions I asked was, if I gave you a magic wand and you could change anything about this company, and it didn't matter how much it cost, how it got done, et cetera, what would you do? And so I was meeting with a small team of about 20 people, and they're sitting on stools in front of me. And I got my little marker in my flip chart, and I asked that question. And the first person said, we would get a union back. And my little HR heart went, and I said, okay. And I wrote that down, and I said, okay, you next. And the person, what she said, we would get our union back. And so, like, by the 6th person, and the answer was we would get our union back, I said, okay, I'm going to put the marker down. I said, tell me why you feel like you need a union. Well, we feel like we don't get heard. We feel like no one's listening to us. We feel like we're being mistreated. And I said, I can tell you that I feel like that's why I'm here. And what my goal is that I want to earn your trust. I don't expect it upfront, because you've obviously had some mistreatment and some difficulties with HR in particular in the past. I want to earn your trust. I want you to feel like you can talk to me. I want you to feel like we are doing everything we can to treat you with respect and to value the work that you do. And I know that's going to take time. So I understand that now you feel like you need a union again. But all I'm asking is that you give me and us a chance to hopefully treat you in a way that you don't feel like you need a third party to be the intermediary between you and me. Now, did they all go, oh, that's amazing, great, we're going to look forward to that? I'm still getting people with their arms crossed, like, but over time, again, through actions and small actions and big actions, I think we were able to accomplish that. Where if I had had that same small group meeting 3.5, 4 years later, when I left, I don't think that would have been their first answer, and maybe not even an answer that would have come to their head.
You just filled me up with so much excitement and motivation on why I love HR. A lot of people think about it as, somebody who is focused on compliance, but it's really somebody that can bridge together, different thoughts and people and help them be seen and give them a voice. And it's so timely right now that you mentioned union, because in the industry where most of my listeners are, they're thinking about unionizing, because the turnover, at least for entry level staff, is in some companies over 100%. The average is about 70% turnover in less than 90 days sometimes. And then the certified staff are trying to leave the industry completely, and that we're already low on staff and the gap there. Correct me if I'm wrong, but if you're looking at this just for the 5 minutes that you're hearing about it and connecting dots, not having HR in most of these companies, could that potentially be a great starting point?
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously work to be done, and someone looking at it again from a broader perspective than a manager who's probably understaffed for both turnover reasons and other reasons, who has work to be done. So they're driving people hard. Maybe they're being disrespectful. Maybe they're doing a lot of things. So it doesn't sound like someone looking at it from an overall perspective about how we should treat people, what our systems should be like, getting pipelines in place to make sure that we have people understanding why there's turnover today. Again, are there training issues? Are there onboarding issues? Are there fair treatment issues? Probably some version of all the above, but what can we address? And just to share an example, back to that most recent example that I shared of the company I went into where there was a lot of distrust. I was given 3 priorities by the leadership team when I joined that they wanted me to do. And after I went out on my listening tour and talking to people, I came back, I said, I'm not going to do 2 of the 3 things that you told me that we need to do, because we've got some bigger problems. One is nobody trusts us, and I can't do these things until we gain that trust. And so here's what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to employees, and I'm going to pick one problem that, again, the leadership team had mentioned and the employees absolutely very vocal about. We had an attendance policy, or they did. I'm not a big fan of attendance policies today, but this was a manufacturing environment, and they had a really wild attendance policy, again, that over the years had been negotiated to like 16 points before you'd get fired or something. And there were way points dropped out. It was so complex and crazy, but it was not ministered fairly. That was what I heard 100% from people, was that HR was unfair in how they applied the attendance policies. The people in the factory thought the attendance policy was great, but that it wasn't administered fairly. The management thought the attendance policy was too lax, and I don't know that they cared whether it was administered fairly or not. They were probably a lot of the ones pushing for it not to be. So what I told the employees was, and it hurt my little heart because I had come from a manufacturing organization that was working really well. I said, I don't like the attendance policy either. It's terrible and we need to do some work to fix it, but that's going to take time. So what I'm going to do in the meantime is I'm going to commit to you that we in HR will administer the policy as it is written today fairly. And people are like, okay. Well, then the first person that, before would have gotten a point that didn't get a point. Well, the managers are like, wait, why are you not, well, that the policy says this. And then the first person that, in the factory that didn't get something taken away that they thought they were maybe in the past had been, I was like, well, the policy says this. Do I like this policy? No, but I'm going to administer it fairly until we have something different. And that may or may not have been the right approach because it was really stupid, but just continuing to tell people over and over again, this is what it says and this is what we're doing. We're not going to do this long term. And I also said, and I think that was important, was I'm going to need your help to design something better. And so what I did was I had, again, worked at a place where we had a pretty well-oiled attendance policy that was pretty fair. And my CEO was like, just do that here. And I'm like, I can't. This is a completely different culture, completely different environment. But I put out some suggestions to people and I said, we're looking at making changes to the attendance policy by such and such a date. I'm going to ask for your feedback during this time to reach something that we can all live with. And I asked for their feedback. But I said, here's what I'm thinking. And I'd asked for their feedback. Nobody was giving me feedback. Like, 3 or 4 people were giving me feedback because they'd never really been asked that before. And again, they didn't trust that they would be heard. But as I started implementing changes, I would say, here's the change we're making and here's the feedback I got. And people started seeing she's actually using our feedback. Next time, well, instead of 3 people out of the, 700 giving me feedback, I get 300, pieces of feedback because they're like, oh, she actually is listening. Does she do everything we want? No. But if I don't say what I think she should do, then, she's not going to know that. So, that's where I think HR again can add value because the day-to-day activities of the leader, yeah, they can do a lot on their own team to have a culture of trust and respect, but they're going to have to hopefully to have that administer the policies and procedures that we have fairly. And if those aren't equitable across the organization, then it's going to be hard for them to make much headway. So HR can do a lot across an organization that one great leader can't do. There are pockets in every organization where there's a great leader and a happy team. And there are also in even great organizations, pockets of unhappy teams with poor leaders. But HR's job is really to lead across the organization.
What a way to show up and being present and listening to them. Having the right HR person is so important. And man, did they get that in you? So I'm glad to hear it turned out well. Sounds like a lot of hard work, but you stayed through it. And
I'm sure if any of them are listening today, there's probably somebody going, I hated her, but
well, you can't please everyone, but you can try to do it fairly.
you cannot. But again, the goal was I need you to trust me. And even when you don't like what we do, understand that there's a reason behind it that hopefully is for the greater good. And I think over time, we might have achieved that.
Sounds like you did. And I appreciate you showing up here as well and being present for the listeners. And before we go, I want to transition and ask you some quick questions, if that's all right with you.
Sure.
All right. What is a book or podcast that you recommend listeners to take a listen or read?
I listen to a ton of podcasts, but I'll give you one, Work Life with Adam Grant. He's a New York Times bestselling author, industrial organization psychologist, and a professor at Wharton. But I like the way he thinks. I like the way he asks questions, and he always has interesting business leaders, authors, thought leaders. And I think all of his episodes I can apply in some way to leadership and how I move through the world of work.
Thank you. Strong recommendation. And what is a quote that you say that people often repeat back to you or that you see people jot down when you're doing one of your presentations?
Yeah, I think it's one that I said in my first Disrupt HR talk I did at the very first Disrupt HR event in Cincinnati, Ohio in 2013. Even though the Disrupt HR talks are supposed to be about work in the workplace or ideas about the future of work, I did a talk on awesomeness is not accidental. I don't know where that idea came from, but I used a lot of memes and everything and made a pretty funny talk. But one of the things I said in that talk was comfort is the enemy of awesome, something like that. I just put it in a presentation I did last week. I don't know why. Comfort is the enemy of awesome, but that's in theory what it is. And I think we can't be awesome if we just stay in our comfort zones. And that is something that people do repeat back to me or take pictures of the slide when I put it up. Comfortable is the enemy of awesome. That's it. Because too many of us get in that mode of things are going well, life is good. I just keep doing what I do. But the world of work is changing so fast. It has been for many years, but certainly even faster in the last 3 to 5. We can't stay the same. What's been working well will not continue to work always, or there's something out there that could work better. So when you get comfortable, we've often heard something is on the outside of your comfort zone, whatever that saying is, but it is true. When you are like, wow, I can just coast, that's when you're in danger because things are changing around you and you need to be curious. Back to if comfortable is the enemy of awesome, then curiosity is the antidote to make sure that we are looking out and saying, wow, again, things are working really well, but what could work better?
Excellent. And obviously did not work out well for the HR individual that you replaced that said, we can't do anything else. So it can definitely affect your job as well when you're not.
That is
That is true. Um, and what is a tip that you have for individuals on LinkedIn to make a real connection?
I think as someone who gets a lot of connection requests, and I don't mean to say that in a non-humble way, whatever the opposite of humble is, arrogant maybe. It really warms my little heart when it's someone who mentions something that I wrote or said or did, or that they've been following my work for a while and here's, something they've taken away from that. I think to make a real connection, comment on posts of people that you value their work before you invite them to connect. I do the same thing when I write something and people write insightful comments, if I'm not connected to them, I look at their profile and then I invite them to connect because I want to continue to learn from them because they shared an insightful comment. So I think that's a lot, especially on LinkedIn, where for those of us who were back on LinkedIn in the early days when you had to have someone's email address in order to be able to invite them to connect, the theory being that you only knew people that you had their email addresses. And then they switched to, now you can invite anybody to connect. And as someone who has almost 30,000 connections on LinkedIn, I obviously don't know a lot of those people. And so to make it more personal, I think the opportunity is there to really engage in the comments. I try to go on LinkedIn several times a day and not just like posts, but force myself to comment. If I read something, I'm like, wow, that was really good. Instead of just scrolling on by, I'm like, I need to let the author of the post know what resonated with me about that or to share. Maybe I respectfully disagree, but I think that engagement is the value on LinkedIn and it's the value in the connections where we don't know people in real life. I could give you numerous examples of people that I have become huge fans of that I've never met in person through getting to know them through their posts on LinkedIn and interacting with them there. So those are really warm connections. My best friend lives in Raleigh, North Carolina, and we connected way back when blogging was a thing. And I was a big fan of her blog. I love everything she still writes on LinkedIn and other places. And she has some LinkedIn learning courses, but we built a really strong friendship before we met in person through interacting. So I don't discount that some relationships can grow very strong through engagement and interaction. And I think that's what a lot of people miss. They're like, Jennifer McClure showed up on this influencer list. I'll invite her to connect. And I'll accept if you're in HR or leadership. I do look at every profile of everybody who invites me to connect. And sometimes I'm like, I really don't know you should be connected. You can follow me because if you invite somebody to connect and they don't accept, you're still following them. But if we have things in common, I'm like, you got Keanu Reeves in your headline? Yes, connect. But, you know, it'd be much more meaningful if you saw my name on an influencer list, to maybe go back and read a few of my posts and comment on them and then send me a connection request and say, I saw your name on this list. I looked at your work. I really value what you have to say. I would love to continue to learn from you. That's the way you can personalize it. That was not a short answer, but as you can
That's
see,
perfect.
I have some thoughts about connections.
I knew you would. I actually added that question just speaking to you because I know how much you value connection and you do it so authentically. And that's been my experience with you. I hope that the listeners got something out of that as well. And I'm sure they did.
I think didn't we connect because you commented on one of my posts or something like that?
Yeah, yeah. And I reached out and said, hey, I'm starting this podcast. Would love to have you on. And you replied and said, I love having connection and let's talk. So you're so welcoming and open. Thank you for being on. I appreciate it. I hope that there are good cupcakes in your future, even if you don't post it any longer. You like cupcakes. Yeah, I appreciate your time, Jennifer. Thanks for connecting.
Thanks for the opportunity to chat with you today.
Well, that's it for my conversation with Jennifer. It was such a treat to have her on here today, and I hope you're leaving with fresh ideas you can take back to your team, whether that's sparking new HR projects or simply trying one small change this week. You can check out the show notes for more details and resources from today's episode. And if you're enjoying the People Contingency podcast, please rate it and review the show. It helps more people find these conversations. And if today's episode sparked something in you, share it with a colleague and get the conversation started together. I'm Holli Beth, reminding you to stay curious, stay connected, and stay human. Thanks for listening.